In Alaska, climate-induced migration means that we now experience 3.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature in the wintertime, and that is causing decreased Arctic sea ice, which is making coastal communities not protected by the storms that come in the autumn. So Arctic sea ice normally protects coastal communities when storms come in from erosion, and without that Arctic sea ice, there are accelerated rates of erosion because permafrost is also melting, which is causing the communities to become uninhabitable and people can no longer live there. With climate change, most people should be able to rely on their governments to protect them from the climate change impacts that are threatening them. I think the question is, do governments around the world have the capacity to respond to the climate change impacts that are going to affect the habitability of communities? And I think the answer to that question, based on my research in Alaska, is no. Governments, not even in the Northern Hemisphere, not even in the United States, has the capacity to respond to the climate change impacts that are threatening the habitability of communities. The federal, state, and tribal governments in Alaska have tried to use the traditional methods of protecting communities in place, like seawalls, but the seawalls have not been able to protect the community. So in one community called Kivalina, which is on the northwest coast of Alaska, the government spent several $1 million, $15 million, I believe, to build a seawall in 2006. And on the day of the dedication ceremony, when there were congressional members present, a storm came in and destroyed the seawall. And then the year later, in 2007, another storm came in and 3/4 of the people in the community needed to evacuate. They then built another seawall with different materials, but they're only saying that that seawall will be able to protect people in the place where they live for another 10 to 15 years, and that was completed in 2009. And there are very few governments in the world that have a relocation institutional framework that provides funding and also agency mandate to provide technical assistance to the communities that need to relocate. The only examples that we have of relocations are relocations that are forced by governments because of dam construction, for instance, in China or India, or in Alaska, the federal government forced the relocation of people during World War II with the theory that to protect them because Japan bombed the Aleutian Islands. So we do not have institutional frameworks for these sorts of planned relocations where climate change is the reason why people are needing to relocate. Most of the research is being done in the Southern Hemisphere with this concern that people from the Southern Hemisphere are going to come north as a result of climate change. But based on my research, I don't think the issue. The issue is people are going to need to relocate within the countries where they currently live. And in the Arctic, science has shown that we are warming twice the rate of the global average, and these are the consequences of these climate change impacts. And so my hope in being here is that I can share the experience of what's happening in Alaska, which is a state in the United States, which in theory has tremendous resources to address these issues. And even in the United States, the governance challenges have been enormous, so that even though these communities are threatened, and a government report found that there are 31 imminently threatened communities in Alaska, no community has yet been relocated. And so I think it's critical for countries all over the world, the northern and southern hemisphere, to figure out how to build the national capacity to respond to these issues, so people will not need to leave their countries of origin, that their national governments will be able to respond to the climate change impacts that are threatening them. Climate change is happening in Alaska. What people maybe aren't aware is that Arctic sea ice has been reaching record lows now for the last 6 years. And so there was the first documented record low in 2007. And then last summer in 2012, Arctic sea ice extent reached a new record low below 4 million square kilometers, which is the first time ever that since they've been recording Arctic sea ice extent. And they documented that record low 3 weeks earlier than Arctic sea ice extent is normally measured in September. So that the Arctic sea ice extent, the minimum, was recorded last summer in August. And so there is no avoiding the climate change impacts. Climate change is happening, and Arctic sea ice is the air conditioning unit for the rest of the world. And so while in Alaska, the lack of Arctic sea ice is causing communities along the coast to relocate because it's no longer there to be a barrier to storms that come in. In other places in the world, that lack of Arctic sea ice may cause increased flooding and precipitation that will make places along rivers uninhabitable also. I'm hoping that through being here that I will be able to network with other scientists looking at how climate change is impacting communities that will need to be relocated, and figuring out how to create governance institutional models to make it easier for people to be protected when climate change is threatening their lives.